It had been days since Candy's boyfriend Jimmy had come home, and this wasn't the most unusual thing. I mean, he was a limousine driver. Sometimes he would have to drive a few hours away, pick clients up, and even though he was only initially booked for one night, they would end up rebooking for a couple extra. It wasn't that strange that he didn't come home, but not to call? He would always call. He would always call, touch base with Candy, let her know, hey, it's gonna be a couple extra days. And sure, yeah, sometimes he got off his shift at 3 a.m. so he wouldn't call then, but he would at least text. He would never leave her out to dry, wondering what was going on. So, after 24 hours, she decided she should call his boss, make sure everything's all right. I mean, she just wanted to make sure that nothing bad had happened. She called his boss, she said, hey, I know that he went out there at 3 p.m. yesterday. He should have been done around like 3 a.m. I just wanted to see, like, how many extra days is he gonna be out there in Tampa? Jimmy's boss is confused. I mean, she was right. He came out at 3 p.m., finished up at 3 a.m. But once he had completed the job, he had come to his boss, given him the money, taken his cut, and left for the night. He was actually supposed to come back just a couple hours later because he had another job to do, but he never showed. More than that, he actually left his truck in the company driveway. He hadn't left in his own car. His boss assumed there was probably a good reason why he hadn't come back, but now that Candy was calling, he's not so sure. After hearing this, Candy was rightfully panicked. She called Jimmy's dad because there was never a day where he didn't talk to his dad. I mean, they were incredibly close. But when she called him, she found out that his dad hadn't heard from him in days. Right after getting off the phone with Candy, his father called 911 and reported him missing. The police got involved immediately, but they weren't really suspecting any sort of foul play. They just thought this was a situation where Jimmy was either kidnapped or hiding. I mean, they knew he had a lot of money troubles. He was constantly borrowing from people and he almost never paid them back. It's not beyond the realm of possibilities that maybe one of those people was just trying to scare him, or maybe they already did scare him and that's why he's hiding. I mean, no one thought Jimmy was dead until she called. Once they got that phone call, everything changed. 7 words would haunt all of the officers involved in the investigation for the rest of their lives. Those words being, you should have come in the house that first day. Hi guys, welcome back to another spooky Saturday. The growth on this channel has been really incredible so far, so thank you guys so much for all of your support. I really appreciate it. Before I get into the story, I just want to give a special shout out to Explore With Us. They're a really comprehensive channel on here. They compiled a lot of the facts that I'm going to be using in today's video. They also have the full interrogation tapes up on their channel as well, so if you're interested in seeing those, I will link them below. Like I said, James Schaeffer worked for Blue Diamond Limousines. At 3 p.m. he had left his neighborhood, said goodbye to his girlfriend Candy to head out for a job in Tampa. And after he didn't come home the night before, his girlfriend reached out to his boss and his father and realized that nobody else had heard from him either. After his father reported him missing, the police immediately started looking into the case. They went to where he would have reported back with his boss, and they found out that there was actually a mechanic who had seen Jimmy after he walked out of the building and was headed towards his truck. The mechanic had been sleeping in his car and was woken up around 3 a.m. because of a sound. When he looked out of his car, he saw Jimmy walking down the driveway, and there was a dark 4-door car pulling up on the road without its lights on. He claimed that he heard a man's voice call out to Jimmy to get his attention, and that Jimmy had then redirected and started walking towards the car. When he reached the car, the same man's voice told him to get in, and then he did. And from the mechanic's perspective, it didn't seem like any of this was under duress. And once Jimmy had gotten into the car, they drove down the road and they never turned their lights on. Around this same time, Jimmy had texted Candy telling her not to worry, but that he had to lie low and hide out for a while because there were some people who he owed money and he didn't want them coming across him until he had the money to pay them back. Candy explained to the police that Jimmy routinely borrowed from people and he did owe a lot of people kind of a lot of money, but that she didn't think any of those people would be willing to hurt him. I mean, most of the people who Jimmy borrowed from were friends or family. After the police hear this, they're thinking to themselves, okay, this makes sense. He probably wasn't kidnapped. He's probably hiding out. That's probably why he got picked up in a different car without the lights on. Seemed like he knew the person who was picking him up. Okay, it's all starting to come together. On April 4th, they start their search. The first thing that they want to do is they want to go around, they want to talk to everybody who lives near Jimmy, just in case he had come back around the house, maybe Candy had just missed him. Want to know if anybody saw anything, if anybody knew anything. The first house they go to is one Angela Stoltz. She lives across the street, and her husband was actually best friends with Jimmy before he disappeared about a year and a half ago. Now, Angela's husband didn't disappear under any sort of mysterious circumstances or anything like that. He was alive and well. In fact, he routinely called Angela. She just didn't know exactly where he was. It seems like this is sort of a similar situation to what's going on with Jimmy. Jimmy might even be with Angela's husband. So the police wanted to know as much information about where her husband had gone, just in case that was the case. She couldn't really give them any information. The best that she could do was just to explain to them that whenever he did call, it was from a phone number that was based in Ohio, and that doesn't mean that he's in Ohio, but it is the same line that calls her every single time. It's not like he's using random payphones, so they could potentially use that. Angela then explained that despite the fact that her husband had left about a year and a half ago, they were still married, and even though he was really best friends with Jimmy, she and Jimmy had still remained close despite his absence. In fact, she was actually the payee on his Social Security account, and they had a joint bank account together. She had even seen him the last day he went to work at about 4 a.m. at a Winn-Dixie. He had asked her to meet him there. He had pulled up with some John Doe that she didn't recognize, and because she was the payee on his Social Security account, she ended up giving her $150, and that was pretty much it. She also explained to the police that the day after he was considered missing, she had actually received a few texts from him, mainly just logistical stuff. Not anything all that interesting, but after she had heard that he had been reported missing, she had actually texted him, letting him know like, hey, people are worried about you, the cops are looking for you, and she hadn't gotten an answer. The cops asked if they could come back the next day to record these text messages off of her phone officially, and Angela said of course. She just wanted to make sure that Jimmy was fine. At this point in the investigation, the number one priority for the police is just figuring out who Jimmy was hiding from and why. So over the course of the first 10 days of the investigation, they stayed in really heavy contact with both Candy, Jimmy's girlfriend, and Angela, Jimmy's neighbor. Because Angela was the payee on Jimmy's account, she was especially useful because were he to withdraw or deposit any money, that would at least confirm the police's suspicion that he was simply hiding rather than being kidnapped. But the more that the police talk to Angela, the more they start to suspect that she's not being completely honest. They think that she knows more about where Jimmy is than she's letting on, and that she might be covering for him. Maybe she's even trying to make him run around in circles so that he can buy himself some time. When they confront her about this, she's pretty direct in her response, and she confirms that actually, she does know a little bit more than she's been letting on. And so the cops take her in for questioning. During the interrogation, Angela actually had sunglasses on. This can pose a real problem for investigators because human beings almost always express through the eyes. Whether or not you're somebody who has a really still face or a really animated face like me, it doesn't matter. The eyes are the window to the soul in that regard. Somebody wearing sunglasses, especially when it's somebody who doesn't emote heavily in the rest of their face, it can be a real problem. But if the investigators were to ask her to remove her sunglasses immediately, it might make her less inclined to be as open in the questioning process because it might tip her off to the fact that they don't really trust her. And in an interrogation, it's really important to maintain a sense of trust if you want to get answers to your questions. This is not a custodial investigation, so she is free to leave. They're just officially bringing her in so that they can get answers to whatever questions they may have and have this information recorded in the interrogation room. And all of that can be somewhat stressful, so they don't want Angela to feel like she's in trouble or something, because really they just want to know more information about her relationship with Jimmy, why she's his payee instead of Candy, and just any other pertinent information she may know and may be withholding at this time. So one of the first things they want to know is, why was she his payee? How did that happen? Angela explains that she really didn't want to be his payee actually, but he'd been begging her for weeks and weeks and weeks, and she just eventually ended up caving. And she wasn't actually all that happy about the arrangement, but it was what it was, and she was just trying to help out a friend. The next logical question for the police is, was Jimmy an addict of some sort? Because a lot of times when somebody isn't good with managing their money and they're constantly borrowing money from people, it could be drugs, alcohol, gambling, what have you. Angela explains that no, though Jimmy did drink and he would do some drugs from time to time, it wasn't beyond the realm of what she considered to be normal. She even admits that there were a couple times where she had driven him to pick up, but that she got more of the impression that maybe he was just sort of being a middleman or dealing a little bit on the side, rather than it being a situation where he was really addicted to drugs. It didn't seem like he had a problem to her. So from Angela's point of view, it just didn't really seem like he had a problem, at least not with addiction, though he certainly had money problems. She had helped him out with money a couple times, but really the main person who was sort of bankrolling Jimmy was his father. His father had gone so far as to take out multiple loans so that he could continue giving Jimmy money, and had essentially bankrupted himself for the sake of his son. All of this is useful and pertinent information, but it doesn't particularly come off as like withheld information. So then the cops ask the obvious question. You know, what is it that you haven't been telling us? Angela explains that what she hadn't told them was that she had actually seen Jimmy on April 5th at her house. After the police had already come and initially spoken to her, she had seen Jimmy again. And she had told them everything that had happened, that the cops were looking for him, that Candy was worried about him, but that Jimmy had insisted that she not tell anybody, that nothing was wrong. He was just hiding out, and he was trying to scrape together enough money so that he could not only pay his mortgage, but also pay back some of the people that he owed money to. And that he didn't want her updating the police on the nature of his situation, because if the police knew where he was, one of the people that he owed money to would also know. So there's an indication that maybe he's friends with an officer who had loaned him money, or at the very least somebody who has access to whatever info the police have access to as well. And that's the reason why Angela didn't update the cops about having seen Jimmy, because she was just trying to be a good friend and she didn't want Jimmy to get in trouble more than he already had. Partway through this questioning process, Angela's estranged husband actually gives her a call. So the police do get confirmation that he's alive, he's well. He does actually call her from Ohio, like she said, and it is just sort of a weird situation where he's just out in the wind and Angela doesn't really know why he's hiding. At least she won't say why he's hiding. At least she says she doesn't know why he's hiding. At this point, the vibe of the questioning starts to like shift, because now the police have new information. It's at this point in the questioning that the vibe really shifts, because now Angela has informed the police that she is definitely the last person to see Jimmy. If her story about him coming to her house, telling her, hey, don't tell the cops about any of this is true, which these texts seem to back up, in the event that Jimmy might be dead, which the cops are now suspecting he very well could be, since a couple weeks have gone by and there's no CCTV footage of him or anything, then Angela would likely be the last person who saw him alive. And that's generally not a good position to be in. But like I said, this isn't a custodial situation, so when they're done with their questions, Angela's free to leave. And she does. Angela's sister April calls in, and she reports that Angela has admitted to her, as well as her parents, to committing a crime. She doesn't want to tell dispatch right away what that crime is. She wants to speak to an officer, preferably in person. She also requests from dispatch that Angela be Baker acted. And to be Baker acted in Florida is when the police come and basically prevent you from harming yourself or others.
911, where's your emergency?
My sister needs to be Baker acted, and she needs to talk to a sheriff's officer.
So she tried to hurt herself this evening? What's going on?
She has pills, and she's threatening to take them, and she's admitted to a crime that she's being investigated for.
Where is your sister at?
She's in the house hugging her kids goodbye.
Why is she hugging her kids goodbye?
Because she came to the house and she told my parents that she committed a crime and that she's being investigated for it. She says it was self-defense, but I don't know. I don't know what the situation is. I told her I didn't want to hear anymore.
April tells dispatch that Angela has medications. She's threatening to take them in excess, potentially OD. She explains that Angela's motive for doing this is because she has confessed to being involved with an active missing persons case, that she is a part of a greater crime, that again, April doesn't want to discuss in detail yet. Apparently what had happened before this phone call was that Angela had left the police station. She had taken her son and her daughter. She had driven to her parents' house, where April also was at the time, and she had confessed to her parents in April. She told her parents that she wanted to make sure that they would take care of her children. And before Angela could tell the full story of just what she had done, April told her she didn't want to hear anymore, walked outside, and made the phone call to 911. After this, Angela was arrested and she was Baker acted. The police immediately take April's call very seriously, and they show up to Baker act and arrest Angela. And as Angela is walked past one of the officers that had been handling Jimmy's missing persons case, she whispers over her shoulder, "You should have come inside that first day." And it wouldn't be till later that the police would realize just how true that was. But in the moment, they have a responsibility to detain and question Angela. April is also explaining to them in real time that Angela is required to take several different medications, and if she doesn't take them, it can result in psychosis, and that this has happened before. She has had psychotic episodes because of a failure to take her meds consistently, and that April can usually be tipped off to the fact that Angela isn't taking her meds as prescribed when she starts to notice major shifts in Angela's demeanor or massive mood swings. Because of this and being Baker acted, Angela is taken to a crisis center. After a couple days, she has been assessed by a few different experts in the center, and they deem her to be mentally sound for further questioning with investigators. She's brought in for questioning, and this time she has read her Miranda rights. And for the first time in weeks, police are finally hearing Angela's real opinions of Jimmy. She explains to them that Jimmy had been taking advantage of her for years, that he constantly lied, he constantly borrowed money from her, and she had just about had enough. She said that he treated his father the same way that she treated her, like a bank, that she was disgusted by the way that he constantly drained him, the fact that he had taken out so many loans just so he could support Jimmy and his family, and that because of Jimmy's spending habits and inability to maintain financial stability, he and his family were constantly on the brink of homelessness, and that he would weaponize that fact. It seems that the breaking point for Angela was when Jimmy asked her if her dying father would be willing to give him a loan of $4,000. He said that he'd be willing to sign over his car title in exchange. And it's at this moment that Angela decides Jimmy deserves a taste of his own medicine. So she looks him in the eye and she says, "Yeah, I think my dad would totally agree to that." Jimmy's surprised. He's like, "Are you sure? You sure he would give me the money? You sure he's good for it?" Angela emphasizes, "Yep, he's definitely good for it. My dad would do anything for me, and if I ask him, he'll definitely say yes." Jimmy is over the moon to have found another cash cow. He's elated. He almost can't believe it. He keeps asking Angela over and over and over again, "Are you sure? Are you sure he's good for you? Are you sure he'd do it?" And she reassures him he's definitely gonna do it. But she knows he won't. In fact, she's not even gonna ask him. It's not even on the table. She's setting Jimmy up so that he can get all excited, think he's gonna get his money, and then the reality can come crashing down on him. Finally, Jimmy's gonna see what it feels like to be lied to and taken advantage of all the time. She tells the cops that that's all she really wanted, was to teach him a lesson, let him see what it's like to be her. She confirms that yes, Jimmy had been picked up by a dark car without lights on, and that voice the mechanic had heard was her son, because Angela had brought her son and her daughter with her to come pick Jimmy up from work. And that shortly thereafter, she dropped her kids off and her and Jimmy went back to her house to drink, which is something they routinely did. And these weren't just normal drinks, because Angela had put Flexerol in them, which is a muscle relaxer. When she was telling the police about this, she explained that she didn't just put it in Jimmy's drink, she put it in hers too. And he knew the Flexerol was in it. I mean, this was just something that they did sometimes, it just made it hit a little bit harder. She was just trying to get him drunk and happy so that when she let him down, he would feel all the more upset. So she gets Jimmy drunk, telling him, like, listen, my dad doesn't wake up until about 5 a.m. Let's just wait until then we'll go to him and we'll get your money. Jimmy loves this plan and he's having a good old time waiting to go get his cash. They get in the car, Angela drives, so obviously she didn't drink as much as he did because she knew she was gonna have to drive the whole time, and they arrive at a cemetery. Jimmy starts looking around like, your dad lives in a cemetery? Like, this can't be the right spot. And Angela goes, no, like, obviously he doesn't live here. He's not gonna be up for another 15 minutes, so I just thought we would just wait here because it's nearby. Jimmy's like, weird, but okay. And he starts asking her again, like, are you sure he's gonna give me this money? Like, he's really good for it? And she's like, yeah, he's really good for it. He's happy to do it. You know, anything for his little girl. At this point, Jimmy's on cloud 9. He couldn't be happier. Angela knows this is her moment. She turns to him, looks him in the eyes, and says, how's it feel to be lied to, Jimmy? He's taken aback for a second. He's confused. Like, what is she talking about? She repeats it again. How's it feel to be lied to? He asks her what she's talking about. And she explains that not only is her dad not going to give him $4,000, but that she never asked him in the first place, and she would never ask him to. That she was done bailing Jimmy out, and in fact, she no longer wanted to be his payee for his Social Security either. That she was gonna call the bank and she was gonna get the account dissolved. This is not what Jimmy was expected to hear, and it's not what he wants to hear. He is immediately livid. How could she do this to him? Why would she do this? Who the hell does something like that? Who does something like that? He reaches across the car and grabs her shoulder and starts digging his thumb in. She tries to shake him off and tells him to get off of her. He's just getting more and more upset, yelling, I'll kill you, I'll kill you, I'll kill you. And as he's saying it, he's rising up over her, pushing her down lower into the car as he pulls himself across the center console. Angela starts to panic. Jimmy's a lot bigger than her. He's not just tall, he's also large. He's overweight. And Angela is incredibly underweight. She doesn't have any real way to push him off. In a panic, she reaches behind her into the back seat to see if there's anything that she can grab to defend herself. On impulse, she grabs something and flings it towards his face. She ends up stabbing him in the eye with an ice pick. And you would think this would stop him, but it just made him even more angry. Fearing for her life, she reaches behind her again and she feels a pipe. She realizes what it is. It's a DIY tree climber she had made for herself. It's 2 pipes with a rope in the center that she would use to loop around branches and pull herself up. She takes this tool and presses it up against Jimmy's neck. The ice pick is still in his eye, but her arms aren't very strong and Jimmy's still pushing towards her. She gets her feet up in front of her and she presses her feet into each of these pipes, pushing him back up against the car in an attempt to strangle him. But at one point, her foot slips and she ends up kicking the ice pick further into his eye. All of this was just self-defense. Angela didn't think it was gonna go like that. I mean, Florida's a stand your ground state. She should be fine, right? The reality is that Angela would not be fine. First and foremost, what I described just now and what Angela actually physically acted out in the interrogation room wouldn't be physically possible. When I say Jimmy was overweight, he was pretty overweight. And this is a small car. It would have been difficult for him to go from the passenger seat to the driver's seat to press into her shoulder the way she described, let alone for them to have this entire fight in one seat. It wouldn't be possible if he was on top of her for her to reach into the back seat and grab something. It wouldn't be possible for her to get her feet up between them, just given the size of the car and the size of Jimmy's body. None of this could have possibly gone the way that Angela described. But more than that, Jimmy wasn't just stabbed in one eye, he was stabbed in 2. And when asked how the ice pick switched eyes, Angela explains that, you know, she doesn't really remember, but she must have pulled it out at some point and just pushed it into his other eye, all right? So you would assume there's gotta be blood all over the car then. I mean, he's been strangled by her feet. She's kicked the ice pick further into his head. She stabbed him in both eyes. I mean, what a mess, right? Wrong. When the police looked at Angela's car, there was almost no blood. When asked to explain how she could have possibly killed Jimmy in the car in such a violent manner without getting blood anywhere, Angela changes her story a little bit. She explains that when the ice pick was in his eye, he just kind of tilted his head back, and that kept the blood up. And that gave her the opportunity, once he was incapacitated, to take some saran wrap and wrap his entire head, thus sealing in the blood. There was saran wrap in her car, and they do believe that she saran wrapped his head. They just don't believe that any of this happened in the car. What they think actually happened was that Angela didn't drug both their drinks. She just drugged Jimmy's. She took him out to the cemetery, and by the time she was there, he was fully incapacitated, probably not even awake, dragged him out of the car, suffocated him to death, and then stabbed him in both eyes with ice picks for good measure. She had also just bought the ice picks days before this. Then it's likely that she would have saran wrapped his head and dragged him back into the car, which would explain why there's so little blood found in her vehicle. The next part of Angela's story, the cops actually do believe. She claims that then she drove back to her house, backed up into her garage, and then unloaded Jimmy's body into a blue kiddie pool, like the ones you get at Walmart. She had purchased one earlier that week alongside pool salt. When asked why she filled up the kiddie pool with his body in it with excess amounts of pool salt, Angela was reluctant to answer. I personally think that she did that because she thought that that would help dissolve his body faster, or at least prime it to be dissolved easier. But there's no real way to know why Angela bought an excess amount of pool salt, like what would be a normal amount for an actual full-size pool, because she refused to say. But I suspect that that's her rationale. And I think the cops think that as well. She then goes inside and she tells her children not to come into the garage. And the next day she begins dismembering him with a hacksaw. She then moves his body parts into a variety of pots and pans so that she can bring him into the kitchen. She then took the pots and pans filled with his dismembered body parts into her kitchen so that she could begin attempting to cook him down. She says the reason why she did this is because she thought it would be easier to get rid of the body if she could cook him down to nothing but bone, and that she had no intention of consuming his body parts or anything like that. And there was no evidence of consumption that the police found. She also claims that her children were in the house while she was doing all of this, but that she had told them they had to stay in their rooms and that they didn't know what was going on. In fact, the only time that they came out of their rooms was when she kind of messed up. She took Jimmy's foot, as well as what she describes as a chunk of him, so I'm not sure what body part that is. I'm not sure if that's like a limb or if it's just fat or what that means, but she had taken his foot and this other piece of him, and she had put them in her oven because she thought that she could cook him so aggressively in the oven that it would essentially cremate him. And she didn't realize that when she did this, it would create an incredible amount of smoke and a horrifically bad smell. And the smell was so potent that her children came out of their bedrooms to ask what was going on. For fear of her kids seeing what she was doing, she rushed them outside and she began attempting to air out the house, realizing what a mistake she had made. And it's at this moment, when her and her children were outside, when she was actively airing out the fumes of a cooked man's corpse in her kitchen, that the police first approached her about Jimmy's disappearance. That's right, Angela is the woman across the street who the police had first questioned. That's why she had said they should have come into her house that first day, because if they had, they would have discovered Jimmy's entire body in her kitchen, cut into various pieces, actively cooking on her stove and inside her oven. After she had finished speaking with the police, she took Jimmy's phone to a nearby park and she buried it under the park sign. She would go back over the course of the next couple weeks to unbury his phone, text people, call people from different locations so that it would ping cell phone towers, make it look like he was alive, before taking the battery out and reburying it at the park. She took the hacksaw, some medical gloves, and a few other incriminating pieces of evidence, and she discarded them all at various locations. The hacksaw notably was at an active construction site, so when the police tried to go find the hacksaw that she had used, one of the construction workers presumably had picked it up, assuming that it was somebody's actual saw for work, and they were unable to locate it. But of course, I'm sure you're all wondering, where did she hide Jimmy's body then? She had taken all of these body parts except for his head and his torso, and she had put them in trash bags, which she had then abandoned in the tree line of that very same cemetery where she had initially killed Jimmy. They were really just in one large pile together, not that far into the tree line, which I think is a little odd, just because in most cases where you see somebody dismember a person, it's usually so that they can hide the body in a bunch of different areas, make it difficult to identify the person, make it difficult to recover all of the pieces of this person. So it is a little odd that she would dismember somebody only to leave all of their pieces together. But the fact that she had cooked Jimmy's body down made the trash bags a truly grisly sight. A lot of wild animals had gotten into them, ripped them open. Jimmy's foot that Angela had tried to cook in her oven had been clearly eaten by a variety of different wild animals. And the stock pot that she had tried to cook his femur down in was actually in one of the bags, still filled with all of the liquid from that, as well as the bone. But since it had been abandoned there for days, once it was knocked over, all of that liquid had congealed and it was no longer super fluid. It was more of just sort of like a horrifying mass of mush with his femur bone in the center. But amongst all of these trash bags, two things were notably missing: Jimmy's head and Jimmy's torso. Obviously, it's a devastating blow to law enforcement that they were literally questioning Jimmy's killer outside while she was cooking his foot in her oven. But reasonably, there's like no way that they would have known that. They didn't even suspect foul play that early on in the investigation. When they did check Angela's house, however, it was absolutely rancid, and it was clear that like before she had done any of this, her house was already horrifically disgusting. She wasn't exactly a hoarder, but her house was just, it was not cared for at all. There were animal feces everywhere. There was mold. There was a whole host of problems. It doesn't look like she had attempted to clean literally ever. When they went through her house, obviously they found all of the evidence of having cooked a person. But beyond that, they also found the scene where Jimmy and Angela had been drinking the night before the murder. They were able to find the muscle relaxer that she likely stole from her dad. They also found a few other things which are definitely important to mention, but I just want to do a little aside before I get into that. There's a thing in the true crime community referred to as satanic panic. It's a period of time where law enforcement was really pushing this narrative that people committing crimes and serial killers were doing so because they were participating in Satanism and stuff like that. Generally, that's almost never true. It's just something that has historically been used to rile people up, honestly, and fearmonger for the most part. But with Angela and her house, there are a couple weird things that have to do with that going on. Like her two front windows, one of them has a pentagram painted on it, the other has the all-seeing eye painted on it. Also spray painted on her garage was like "Rest in Peace" with Jimmy's initials, which I feel like should have been a major red flag, but I'm not sure if that was there the whole time or what. If it was there the whole time, I feel like the police probably should have picked up on that, especially because if they had picked up on it, they would have found that like half his corpse was in her garage that had that spray painted on it. Some people suspect that she did these things intentionally so that she could plead insanity. Other people think that she did those things because she was experiencing a very real psychotic episode. And of course, when they swabbed the house, the DNA was definitely confirmed to be Jimmy's, and 2 days later, Angela was officially arrested. Surprisingly, her and her legal team decided to move forward with the not guilty plea. I say surprisingly because I see why Angela would think that it makes sense to try and argue self-defense and stand your ground, but I feel like her lawyers should have known better, because there were countless receipts and there was CCTV footage to back up that Angela was the one purchasing these things that indicate premeditation. As far as like the kiddie pool, the pool salt, a lot of cleaning supplies, the hacksaw, the medical gloves, the ice picks, essentially everything that she used to commit the murder as well as clean up after herself, she had purchased about a week in advance. And that makes it basically impossible to argue stand your ground in self-defense, because it points to you clearly planning this out. And whatever credibility Angela had left, which wasn't a lot, was absolutely decimated when she decided to get on the stand and change her story once again. The opposition used this to argue that these crimes were premeditated and that they suspect one of the major motives beyond just like the bad faith that her and Jimmy had between one another over all of the money stuff was that she was trying to be the only person to collect his social security checks, and that she thought she would be able to maintain her role as his payee and cut him out of the equation, and that would sort of be her way of getting paid back for all of the money that she had lent him, and also just like payback for all of the resentment that she clearly felt towards him. There was also evidence that at some point when Jimmy was still alive, before the murder, before any of this, she had actually taken his phone and staged several different text messages between them. Additionally, after committing the murder, she allegedly admitted to having killed Jimmy over the money stuff to her 14-year-old daughter. It just doesn't leave the impression that this was self-defense in any way, shape, or form. It also really hurt Angela's case that when her computer was inspected, investigators found a folder that was literally titled Yummy Gore, and it was full of just vor and gore. She was also really pretty detached talking about the logistics post-murder most of the time that she was on the stand, which juries tend not to resonate with, I guess you could say. For example, she explained to them in a pretty matter-of-fact way that Jimmy's head wouldn't fit into her stock pot with the ice pick in his eye, and so she removed it so that his head would fit. Needless to say that her stand your ground plea was rejected on December 5th, 2014, and she was found guilty of all charges. Finally, when asked officially in court why she had cooked him, Angela claims that that was the result of paranoia and delusional thinking. A lot of people felt like she might try and appeal under some sort of insanity plea, but a panel of experts came out and they said that since they've been observing her throughout the course of this case, after she had been Baker acted, there was really nothing about her that indicated to any of them that she was experiencing paranoia or delusional thinking, that she wasn't in her right mind and she wasn't lucid. They said that she was consistently coherent, that her memory was really strong, and she was a really clear communicator. So there's just really no argument to be made for her not being lucid enough to understand the consequences of her actions or what her actions were. Unsurprisingly, she was given life without the possibility of parole, plus 15 years for mutilation and another 5 years for tampering with evidence. And to this day, she still maintains her innocence by reason of temporary insanity. She also says that her actions were a result of having PTSD from 2 previously abusive relationships, which I actually quite resent because I'm diagnosed with complex PTSD. PTSD is not exactly the same in every single person. Of course, every single person is different, but a PTSD episode, it usually results in like flashbacks or panic. Sometimes people go nonverbal. It certainly doesn't look like an extended experience that's going on for weeks at a time where you're premeditating murder and then you're callously cutting somebody's corpse up who you call a friend for years and years and years, and then you attempting to cook them down so that you can get away with it all. That's just, to blame that on PTSD is just not, it's just not appropriate, to be honest. But she goes on to say that the reason why it manifested that way for her is because she was not in counseling at the time, which therapy and counseling is great for everybody. You should all go to therapy. I'm in therapy. And while I don't think it's fair to say that if Angela was in counseling, none of this would have happened, but I do think no matter who you are and what you're going through, counseling and therapy is incredibly invaluable. Everybody needs somebody to talk to and help them navigate through life. As for her meds, I do know different medications can result in derealization or psychosis and all sorts of other things, but like I said, the panel of experts that was observing her, they came to the conclusion that Angela did what Angela did because that's what Angela wanted to do. And since she's been incarcerated, she's communicated with a few different people outside, and she's changed her story once again, which really doesn't help her case. She's currently maintaining that, like, she wasn't trying to be vengeful at all or give him a taste of his medicine, but that she had driven him to the cemetery after they were hanging out as friends just to let him know that she was gonna have to close the Social Security account because there was some sort of processing problems with the bank, and that Jimmy got mad at her about it. And while she was just trying to have a heart-to-heart with him, he ended up getting homicidally violent with her, and she just did what she had to do. I think it's pretty obvious that Angela just keeps changing her story because she's trying to get a certain outcome. So she just keeps tailoring it as she gets more information and learns more about how the legal system works to try and paint herself as a more believable victim and make this seem more like a self-defense stand your ground scenario. But I don't think that she's gonna get any takers as far as that's concerned. I also want to say that I know a lot of people are really sensitive about money and finances and don't be a borrower, don't be a lender kind of a thing. And because of that, I think a lot of people may feel inclined to condemn Jimmy and his behavior and maybe even go so far as to say that he deserved it. So I just want to circumvent that in advance by saying, like, nobody deserves what happened to Jimmy. No one deserves that. Was Jimmy an upstanding member of society? No. But I don't think that that means that you deserve to get murdered and then cooked. I just want to make that clear now because I did see some comments while I was researching this of people saying things like he got what he deserved, things to that effect, and I don't think that that's fair. Jimmy also has, like, children and a family. He's trying to remember this crime didn't happen in a vacuum. No crimes do. So try and extend your empathy to Jimmy and his family. Like, was he financially struggling? Yes. Was he a good friend? I don't get that impression. But that doesn't mean that he deserved to have, like, one of the worst things possible happen to him. That doesn't even mean that he deserved to have anything bad happen to him. I think if you're trying to teach someone like Jimmy a lesson in this situation, the best thing you can do is just to, like, financially cut him off. Like, stop enabling the bad behavior. Is he gonna be happy about it? No. Will he ever speak to you again? Maybe not. But I think that's the most appropriate thing you can do in this kind of situation. Anyway, if you guys stuck it out to the end of the video, thank you so much. I really appreciate you watching all the way through, and I'll see you next Saturday. Bye!